Deep within history, on pages covered in the dust of time, lies perhaps humanity's most unsettling question. Thousands of years ago, long before the birth of modern civilization, did the world experience a war unimaginable even today? In the ancient lands of India, amidst the mysterious ruins of the Indus Valley, clues hidden in the lines of ancient texts have led some researchers to a surprising theory. Perhaps humanity lived through the nuclear age not once, but twice. This idea may seem absurd at first, but when the evidence is presented, even the most skeptical minds are forced to pause. Indian epics, such as the Mahabharata and Ramayana, contain descriptions of weapons whose effects are surprisingly similar to those of modern nuclear weapons. In the ruins of cities thousands of years old, stones are found that have melted and turned to glass at high temperatures. And perhaps most strikingly, the scientist who created the atomic bomb himself alluded to these ancient texts in his words after the first nuclear explosion test. When Robert Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita after the Trinity test, saying, "Now I am death, destroyer of worlds," most of us thought it was just a dramatic statement. However, years later, in an interview, his choice of words when discussing the first use of nuclear weapons in modern times was striking. The emphasis on modern times left many wondering, had they been used in ancient times as well? Mohenjo-Daro, one of the largest cities of the Indus Valley civilization, mysteriously abandoned around 2500 BC, its inhabitants seemingly vanished in an instant. Archaeologists have found strange things here. In some parts of the streets, stones and bricks had melted and turned to glass as if they had been exposed to immense heat. Some skeletons showed signs of high levels of radiation, and most surprisingly, the city seemed to have been destroyed in a single catastrophic event. But this is not just an archaeological mystery. The oldest texts of Hindu mythology, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, describe something far beyond ordinary battles fought with arrows and swords. These epics depict weapons capable of destroying entire armies with a single arrow, balls of light illuminating the sky and reducing everything to ashes, rising mushroom clouds of smoke, hair and nails falling after battle, dead animals and sick people. The Brahmastra was one of the most powerful weapons. It was the weapon of Brahma, the creator of the universe. According to the texts, when this weapon was used, the sky would glow, a tremendous explosion would occur, and everything would be reduced to ashes. In the region where it was used, it would not rain for 12 years, and the soil would become infertile. The Agneya Astra was the weapon of Agni, the god of fire. This weapon created an irresistible firestorm. While burning enemies, it also consumed everything in its vicinity. For a modern reader, it is almost impossible not to be reminded of the effects of nuclear explosions when reading these descriptions. What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki bears a terrifying resemblance to the descriptions in these texts from thousands of years ago. So how is this possible? There are two possibilities. Either the ancient Indians truly possessed advanced technology and destroyed themselves, or these texts are exaggerated and mythological accounts of natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, and meteor impacts. Scientists mostly prefer the second explanation. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned due to natural causes such as floods, earthquakes, or climate change. The glass formations can be explained by lightning strikes or volcanic activity. Claims of radiation are generally dismissed as inaccurate measurements or naturally occurring radioactive minerals. But the question is, why are there such detailed descriptions of weapons? Why do these texts describe specific effects, not just general destruction? Why was a scientist like Oppenheimer so interested in these texts? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Perhaps ancient people witnessed something we don't understand, and mythology was the only way to describe it. Perhaps there really was advanced technology, but not in the way we imagine. In later installments of this series, we will address all these questions one by one. We will meticulously examine descriptions of weapons in ancient texts. We will scrutinize Mohenjo-Daro and other archaeological findings. We will listen to scientific explanations and discuss alternative theories. Get ready, because this journey leads into one of the darkest and most mysterious corners of history.
Imagine a scene in the dim light of an ancient library with stars twinkling in the sky, dusty shelves filled with texts inscribed on palm leaves. The weathered pages hold millennia of wisdom. And one of these pages recounts one of the most shocking battle scenes in human history. The Mahabharata is the world's longest epic poem. This monumental work, comprising nearly 100,000 lines, embodies the spirit, philosophy, and history of ancient India. But hidden within its pages lies far more than just an ordinary battle. The text was written down between approximately 400 and 300 BC, but the events it describes are believed to be much older. Some researchers believe the epic has an oral tradition dating back to 3000 BC, coinciding with the construction of the pyramids. The story recounts the struggle for the throne between the Pandava and Kaurava families. But this is no mere royal family dispute. This is an epic battle in which the gods intervened and the fate of the entire world was decided. And in this conflict, known as the Kurukshetra War, the weapons were unimaginably destructive. Close your eyes and imagine this. A vast plain, two huge armies lined up facing each other, hundreds of thousands of warriors, horses, elephants, chariots. The sun has just risen, the air smells of dust and sweat. And then the sky shines. The text reads, "A single bullet was filled with all the power of the universe. A column of shining light as bright as 10,000 suns rose in the sky." 10,000 suns. Consider this expression. Why would an ancient writer resort to such exaggeration when describing an ordinary weapon? An arrow, a spear, even the greatest fire does not shine as brightly as 10,000 suns. The text continues, "A column of smoke and fire rose in all its glory, as bright as 10,000 suns. This was an unknown weapon, an iron lightning bolt, a giant harbinger of death." An iron harbinger of death, shining like lightning? Think of Hiroshima, the moment the atomic bomb exploded. What did the eyewitnesses say? A blinding light, a mushroom cloud rising in the sky, and then silence.
The Mahabharata also describes what happened after this explosion. When this weapon was used, the enemies fell like trees burning in the fire. Chariots, elephants, and horses burned to ashes. The waters boiled, the fish died. The warriors threw themselves into the river to cool off. Imagine the warriors throwing themselves into the water. Why? Because there was an unbearable heat, an invisible force that burned the skin. People exposed to radiation do similar things: the burning sensation, the heat, the search for water. But the most striking part is this. After the enormous explosion that covered the battlefield, people's hair and nails fell out. The food became poisoned. The warriors dropped their weapons and ran to the rivers to wash their bodies and equipment. Hair loss, nail loss, food poisoning. These are the classic symptoms of radiation sickness. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki experienced the same symptoms days and weeks after the explosions. Their hair fell out, spots appeared on their bodies. Many died from illnesses whose causes remain unclear. How could an ancient author fabricate such specific details? Hair and nail loss, food poisoning, water boiling. These are not random exaggerations, but descriptions based on real observations. Another passage in the text says, "When this weapon called the horde was used, a bright light appeared in the sky. Fireballs rained down, winds blew violently, the sky turned red. As the earth burned, bloody rain fell from the clouds."
The Mahabharata also describes what happened after this explosion. When this weapon was used, the Mahabharata also describes what happened after this explosion. When this weapon was used, the enemies fell like trees burning in the fire. Chariots, elephants, and horses burned to ashes. The waters boiled, the fish died. The warriors threw themselves into the river to cool off. Imagine the warriors throwing themselves into the water. Why? Because there was an unbearable heat, an invisible force that burned the skin. People exposed to radiation do similar things: the burning sensation, the heat, the search for water. But the most striking part is this. After the enormous explosion that covered the battlefield, people's hair and nails fell out. The food became poisoned. The warriors dropped their weapons and ran to the rivers to wash their bodies and equipment. Hair loss, nail loss, food poisoning, these are the classic symptoms of radiation sickness. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki experienced the same symptoms days and weeks after the explosions. Their hair fell out, spots appeared on their bodies. Many died from illnesses whose causes remain unclear. How could an ancient author fabricate such specific details? Hair and nail loss, poisoned food, boiling water. These are not random exaggerations, but descriptions based on real observations. Another passage in the text says, "When this weapon called the horde was used, a bright light appeared in the sky. Fireballs rained down, winds blew violently, the sky turned red. As the earth burned, bloody rain fell from the clouds."
Imagine a dark night, under the stars. A guru is passing on the most dangerous secret to his student. He speaks in a whisper because this knowledge could destroy the world. This knowledge is called Brahmastra. Brahmastra is the weapon of Brahma, the creator of the universe. But it's no ordinary arrow. As described in the Mahabharata, a special mantra is required to wield this weapon. Only chosen warriors can learn this mantra after years of training. An interesting detail, Brahmastra is not just a physical object, it is an energy, a power. The warrior recites the mantra, focuses on his weapon, and releases that energy. It's as if there's a mental triggering mechanism. So what happens when it's used? The texts are very clear. When Brahmastra is hurled, neither water can extinguish it, nor can the wind change its direction. The sky shines with bright light, the mountains begin to tremble, the seas begin to boil. Mountains trembling, seas boiling, the earth shakes during a nuclear explosion, the shockwave spreads for miles, the heat at the center of the explosion is so high that everything instantly vaporizes. Another text states, when Brahmastra is used, a terrifying sound is heard in the environment. Then a bright light covers the sky. The enemy army disappears in the fire. Only ashes remain. In Hiroshima, the first sound of the explosion was heard from miles away, then a blinding light, and within seconds, tens of thousands of people were reduced to ashes. But the most interesting feature of Brahmastra is the effect it leaves behind. The texts say, the lands where Brahmastra is used remain barren for 12 years. It does not rain, no plants grow, the water is poisoned. 12 years. Why such a specific period? Considering the half-life of radiation, the effect of some isotopes can indeed last for years. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nothing grew for years after the explosion.
In the Mahabharata, A warrior named Ashvathama decides to use Brahmastra. But his guru Vyasa warns him, if you use this weapon, the whole world could be destroyed. There is no turning back. No turning back. The scientists working on Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project shared the same concern. A single use of the nuclear weapon could perhaps bring about the end of humanity. Ashvathama uses the weapon anyway. The text describes it as follows. The arrow was launched, the sky flashed with flames, the earth trembled, living things screamed in fear, even Krishna was worried. Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu in Hindu mythology, a divine being. If even a god is worried, imagine the power of this weapon. But there is an interesting twist in the story. Krishna stops Ashvathama and says, "Withdraw this weapon, otherwise the universe will be destroyed." And Ashvathama stops the weapon by reciting his mantra in reverse. Reverse recitation, like a circuit breaker. Nuclear weapons also have safe usage protocols, codes, keys, confirmations. Perhaps a similar system existed in ancient times? Another feature of the Brahmastra is its ability to select targets. Some texts state the Brahmastra can be directed at a specific person, army, or city. When locked onto a target, it destroys only that target. Guided missile technology, target locking, these are modern concepts. However, the same ideas exist in texts from thousands of years ago. The most striking part is this. If two Brahmastras collide, both are activated, and the world is destroyed. Therefore, the texts forbid the simultaneous use of two Brahmastras. MAD, Mutual Destruction Doctrine. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union acted on the same logic. If one uses nuclear weapons, the other will also use them, and both sides will be destroyed. The logic in ancient texts is exactly the same. Close your eyes and imagine. Ancient India, thousands of years ago. Two great warriors face each other. Both know the Brahmastra mantra. One activates the weapon. The sky shines. The other responds. Two energy waves collide in the air. And then? The texts describe that moment as follows. When the two Brahmastras collided, the universe shook. Three worlds trembled. The gods watched in fear. If these weapons explode, creation will be reversed. Chaos will return.
The reversal of creation, the end of the universe. This was also the greatest fear of the scientists who invented the atomic bomb. Before the Trinity test, some physicists feared that the atmosphere could ignite. If a chain reaction started, the world could burn. The Brahmastra may just be a legend, or perhaps it is a mythological account of a real weapon. In any case, the description of this weapon bears striking parallels with modern nuclear weapons. And this is just the beginning. The Brahmastra is just one of dozens of weapons in ancient Indian texts. Fire, humanity's oldest friend and greatest enemy. In ancient Indian mythology, fire is not just an element. Fire is a god named Agni, and Agni's weapon, the Agneya Astra, is perhaps the most devastating fire weapon in the ancient texts. Imagine a forest, dry trees, burning summer heat, and suddenly a fireball descended from the sky. The trees catch fire instantly, flames spread with the wind, animals run away, and within minutes the entire forest becomes an inferno. In the Mahabharata, Agneya Astra is described as follows. When Agni's weapon is used, thousands of fire arrows rain down from the sky. Each arrow starts a fire. The flames unite and consume everything. Neither water can extinguish nor earth can stop it. What water can extinguish? This is an interesting detail. Water extinguishes a normal fire. However, some chemical fires become more severe when they come into contact with water. Metals such as phosphorus, magnesium, and sodium react with water and explode. Think of napalm bombs used in modern warfare. Gelled gasoline. It sticks to the body and burns. It cannot be extinguished with water. It only goes out if oxygen is cut off. Napalm, used in the Vietnam War, destroyed forests and burned people.
In the Ramayana, it is told that Hanuman burned the city of Lanka. Hanuman sets his tail on fire with the power of Agneya Astra and burns the city. The text says, "The fire on Hanuman's tail spread to the city. The palaces burned. The streets caught fire. The golden domes melted. People jumped into the sea, but the fire even burned the water." Melting of golden domes, the melting point of gold is 1064 degrees, is difficult to reach this temperature in a normal fire. However, thermite reactions, phosphorus explosions, or severe chemical fires can reach this temperature. Even burning water, this seems physically impossible, but if we think metaphorically, perhaps the fire was so hot that it evaporated the water, or the fire was spreading on the water because of the chemical substance floating on the water's surface. Another feature of Agneya Astra is that it is controllable. Some texts say, when using the Agneya Astra, the warrior can determine where the fire goes. It burns the enemy army but does not harm his own soldiers. Smart gun technology, recognizing friend and foe, laser-guided missiles, and GPS-supported bombs used in modern armies, there is a similar concept in ancient texts. In one episode of the Mahabharata, the warrior named Karna uses the Agneya Astra. The text says, Karna shot his arrow. The arrow shattered in the air and turned into thousands of fire arrows. The sky turned red. The Pandava army was engulfed in flames. The soldiers tried to protect themselves by covering their bodies with soil.
Covering their bodies with soil, a classic method of fire protection. The soil cuts off oxygen and insulates the skin from heat. During forest fires, firefighters cover themselves with dirt and mud. However, there's another interesting detail in the text. The fire was so intense that the warriors' armor melted. Bronze and iron liquefied and stuck to their bodies. Screams filled the sky. The melting point of bronze is about 950 degrees, and that of iron is 1538 degrees. It is very difficult to reach these temperatures in a normal fire, but the fire of Agneya Astra was melting these metals. Consider the bombing of Dresden in World War II. Thousands of tons of incendiary bombs were dropped on the city. A firestorm occurred. The temperature was so high that people melted even in shelters. Asphalt flowed. Metals bent. The influence of Agneya Astra is not just physical in the texts. There's also a psychological dimension. When a firearm is used, the warriors become discouraged. They run away in fear. The army disperses. Shock and awe strategy. The concept of shock and awe in modern military doctrine. Hit the enemy so hard that his will to fight is broken. Agneya Astra not only burned, but also frightened. In some texts, Varuna Astra is used to counteract Agneya Astra. Varuna is the god of water. The text says, when the weapon of Varuna was used, water rained down from the sky. Clouds gathered, rain began, and the fire of Agni went out. Counterweapon. Every weapon has an antidote, water against fire. Similar concepts exist in modern warfare. Missile defense systems, electronic jamming, opposing strategies. Perhaps the most mysterious feature of Agneya Astra is that it is controlled by mantras. The warrior initiates, directs, and stops the fire by uttering special words. Fire obeys orders as if it were a being.
Perhaps this is simply a metaphor. Maybe it's the code for starting a chemical reaction. Or maybe it really is a mystical power. In any case, these depictions of weapons make the modern reader think. Close your eyes and imagine an ancient battlefield, thousands of soldiers, and a rain of fire appearing in the sky. Flames engulf everything, screams get louder, and in the end, only ash remains. This was the power of Agneya Astra, the wrath of the god of fire, and in ancient texts it was just one of many weapons. On a scorching summer morning in 1922, on the dusty plains of the Indus Valley, Indian archaeologist R.D. Banerjee knelt down. As he gently brushed away millennia-old soil, the sight that greeted him froze. The bricks gleamed like glass, their surfaces smooth, as if exposed to immense heat. This was not something an ordinary fire could create. Looking through the dust mixed with sweat, Banerjee didn't yet know the name of the mysterious city lying beneath his feet, Mohenjo-Daro. Meaning Mound of the Dead, this name would instantly captivate the archaeological world. Founded around 2500 BC, this metropolis was incredibly advanced for its time. A flawless sewage system, grid-planned streets, two-story brick houses. But the real mystery lay at the end of the city. One day, as if in a snap of a finger, everyone had vanished. As excavations progressed, the team led by Sir John Marshall encountered increasingly bizarre things. The skeletons found in the streets looked as if they had died in the middle of their daily lives. A mother cradling her child, two people holding hands, some standing on stairs, others frozen at the thresholds of their homes. It was as if a sudden catastrophe from the sky had caught the entire city in the same second. Marshall wrote in his 1927 report, "There are no signs of war, no great fire. The city seems frozen in time." This frozen moment brought with it a mystery that would occupy archaeologists for years. In 1962, Italian researcher Andrea Uccelli noticed that in certain areas of the city, the bricks and stones strangely shone like glass. The surfaces smooth, as if they'd melted and solidified again by immense heat. Uccelli wrote in his report, "This melting requires at least 1400–1500 degrees. An ordinary fire cannot do this."
In the Mahabharata, a warrior named Ashvathama decides to use Brahmastra. But his guru Vyasa warns him, "If you use this weapon, the whole world could be destroyed. There is no turning back." No turning back. The scientists working on Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project shared the same concern. A single use of the nuclear weapon could perhaps bring about the end of humanity. Ashvathama uses the weapon anyway. The text describes it as follows. "The arrow was launched, the sky flashed with flames, the earth trembled, living things screamed in fear, even Krishna was worried." Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu in Hindu mythology, a divine being. If even a god is worried, imagine the power of this weapon. But there is an interesting twist in the story. Krishna stops Ashvathama and says, "Withdraw this weapon, otherwise the universe will be destroyed." And Ashvathama stops the weapon by reciting his mantra in reverse. Reverse recitation, like a circuit breaker. Nuclear weapons also have safe usage protocols, codes, keys, confirmations. Perhaps a similar system existed in ancient times? Another feature of the Brahmastra is its ability to select targets. Some texts state the Brahmastra can be directed at a specific person, army, or city. When locked onto a target, it destroys only that target.
Guided missile technology, target locking, these are modern concepts. However, the same ideas exist in texts from thousands of years ago. The most striking part is this. If two Brahmastras collide, both are activated, and the world is destroyed. Therefore, the texts forbid the simultaneous use of two Brahmastras. MAD, Mutual Destruction Doctrine. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union acted on the same logic. If one uses nuclear weapons, the other will also use them, and both sides will be destroyed. The logic in ancient texts is exactly the same. Close your eyes and imagine. Ancient India, thousands of years ago. Two great warriors face each other. Both know the Brahmastra mantra. One activates the weapon. The sky shines. The other responds. Two energy waves collide in the air. And then? The texts describe that moment as follows. When the two Brahmastras collided, the universe shook. 3 worlds trembled. The gods watched in fear. If these weapons explode, creation will be reversed. Chaos will return. Imagine a dark night, under the stars. A guru is passing on the most dangerous secret to his student. He speaks in a whisper, because this knowledge could destroy the world. This knowledge is called Brahmastra. Brahmastra is the weapon of Brahma, the creator of the universe. But it's no ordinary arrow. As described in the Mahabharata, a special mantra is required to wield this weapon. Only chosen warriors can learn this mantra after years of training. An interesting detail, Brahmastra is not just a physical object, it is an energy, a power. The warrior recites the mantra, focuses on his weapon, and releases that energy. It's as if there's a mental triggering mechanism. So what happens when it's used? The texts are very clear. When Brahmastra is hurled, neither water can extinguish it, nor can the wind change its direction. The sky shines with bright light, the mountains begin to tremble, the seas begin to boil. Mountains trembling, seas boiling, the earth shakes during a nuclear explosion, the shock wave spreads for miles, the heat at the center of the explosion is so high that everything instantly vaporizes. Another text states, when Brahmastra is used, a terrifying sound is heard in the environment. Then a bright light covers the sky. The enemy army disappears in the fire. Only ashes remain. In Hiroshima, the first sound of the explosion was heard from miles away, then a blinding light, and within seconds, tens of thousands of people were reduced to ashes. But the most interesting feature of Brahmastra is the effect it leaves behind. The texts say, the lands where Brahmastra is used remain barren for 12 years. It does not rain, no plants grow. The water is poisoned. 12 years. Why such a specific period? Considering the half-life of radiation, the effect of some isotopes can indeed last for years. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nothing grew for years after the explosion.
New excavations in the 1980s revealed extensive evidence of fire in some areas of Harappa. However, these fires did not encompass the entire city. Only certain neighborhoods had burned. Did this indicate an organized attack or something else? Archaeologists found burned grain silos. Thousands of tons of corn and wheat had been consumed by flames. Could the city have died of starvation? Another theory was about disease. Some of the skeletons in the mass graves showed signs of chronic illness. There were signs of malnutrition in the bones. Perhaps a major epidemic had devastated the city. But this alone was not a sufficient explanation, because if there had been an epidemic, why hadn't people left the city? Harappa's greatest mystery was its similarity to Mohenjo-Daro.
The two cities met their end in the same way, at the same time. They were 600 kilometers apart, yet it was as if they had experienced the same catastrophe. This couldn't be a simple coincidence. Had a major event affected the entire Indus Valley? Climate researchers have identified a major drought in the region around 1900 BC. The Saraswati River had dried up at that time. Agricultural lands had turned into desert. Perhaps people had fled from thirst and hunger. But this theory didn't explain those frozen skeletons either. Drought comes slowly. People migrate. But those in Harappa seemed to have been caught in a sudden shock. Close your eyes and imagine that city, a civilization that had stood for 1,000 years. People shopping in the market in the mornings, workers returning home in the evenings, and one day, everything stopped. The streets emptied, the houses were abandoned, only silence remained. Today, the ruins of Harappa stand in the Punjab region of Pakistan. Tourists come and walk among those ancient walls. They take photographs, but no one knows exactly what's on those walls. Harappa buried its secret with the earth, and perhaps it will keep it hidden forever. All we know is this. In the Indus Valley, thousands of years ago, two great cities died at the same time, and whether this death was natural or man-made is still unknown.
On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb in history was detonated in the New Mexico desert, the Trinity test. The explosion was so powerful that the sand melted and turned into glass. Scientists named this new substance Trinitite. It was a greenish, glass-like radioactive substance. This substance was direct evidence of a nuclear explosion. But could a similar glass have been found thousands of years ago in the ancient world? In 1932, a discovery was made in the Egyptian deserts, deep within the Libyan desert. British explorer Patrick Clayton found strange yellowish-green pieces of glass among the sand. These were not natural glass pieces. They were quite pure and appeared to have formed at an immense temperature. Clayton thought these glasses were caused by a meteorite impact. However, strangely, there were no craters in the area. This substance, known as Libyan desert glass, occupied scientists for years. Analyses showed that the glass formed approximately 29 million years ago, but the formation temperature was astonishing, 1,700 degrees. The only thing that could reach such high temperatures is a meteor impact or a nuclear explosion. However, the truly interesting finding was made around Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. In the 1970s, David Davenport and Italian researcher Ettore Vincenti identified similar glass formations in the Indus Valley. These glasses were different from those found in the Libyan desert. They appeared younger and were spread over smaller areas. Davenport claimed they formed approximately 4,000 years ago.
These glass fragments were concentrated in certain areas of Mohenjo-Daro, particularly in the city's center. Davenport stated that this distribution pointed to an eruption center, just like in the Trinity test. The eruption center is the most dense, and the amount of glass decreases outwards. However, the scientific community did not take these findings seriously, as there were alternative explanations. Lightning, for example. A powerful lightning strike can melt sand and turn it into glass. Indeed, lightning-formed glass tubes called fulgurites are found in deserts. Perhaps the glass in Mohenjo-Daro was formed in a similar way. Or volcanic activity. There may have been active volcanoes in the region in ancient times. Lava flows could have melted the rocks and turned them into glass. However, there are no known volcanoes around Mohenjo-Daro. The nearest volcanic area is thousands of kilometers away. More detailed analyses conducted in the 1990s yielded interesting results.
Structures similar to trinitite were detected in some of the glass samples. However, the radioactivity level was no different from the natural background radiation. This weakened the nuclear explosion theory because trinitite, formed after the Trinity test, remains radioactive even after thousands of years. So where did this glass come from? One theory points to a meteor explosion. In 1908, the Tunguska event occurred in Siberia. A meteor exploded in the air before hitting the ground. The explosion was so powerful that it was felt from 100 kilometers away. However, no crater was formed. Perhaps something similar happened in Mohenjo-Daro. Another theory points to a very intense fire. If the city burned down in a massive fire, the temperature could have been so high that the sand would have melted. However, reaching such high temperatures would require a great deal of flammable material, and no trace of such a fire has been found in archaeological excavations.
Close your eyes and imagine. Thousands of years ago, something shone in the sky of the Indus Valley, so bright it was blinding, so hot it melted the sand. And then, glass. A greenish, smooth, mysterious glass. That glass is still there today, hidden in the earth. It holds a secret. Today, scientists continue to study these pieces of glass. Perhaps one day they will find a definitive answer. Perhaps they will unravel the mystery of this glass. Or perhaps, like Mohenjo-Daro himself, this glass will remain a mystery forever. All we know is this. In the ancient world, very high temperatures were generated, high enough to turn sand into glass. And this whispers something to us. Perhaps the weapons in those ancient texts weren't entirely imaginary. The skeletons found in Mohenjo-Daro in 1927 caused a stir in the archaeological world, but the real shocking claim would come 40 years later. In the late 1960s, some researchers suggested something surprising. Much higher than normal levels of radiation had been detected in these skeletons. If true, this would be the strongest evidence for the ancient theory of nuclear warfare. One of the people making the claim was the Soviet scientist A. Gorbovsky. In a paper published in 1966, he wrote that the Mohenjo-Daro skeletons carried radiation 50 times above normal. This was an incredible claim. If true, these people were exposed to radiation. But the problem was this: Gorbovsky did not provide any detailed measurement data.
So what could have done it? In the late 1970s, British researcher David Davenport examined Mohenjo-Daro for years. He examined the city's structure and mapped the distribution of destruction. And his conclusion caused a great stir in the scientific world. Mohenjo-Daro was the very center of a nuclear explosion. The evidence Davenport presented in his book, Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC, was astonishing. There was an area in the center of the city, about 50 meters in diameter. Everything in this area had been completely destroyed, as if it had evaporated. There is a similar area in Hiroshima, Ground Zero, the center of the explosion. There, too, everything had evaporated. Only burnt shadows remained on the walls. Davenport claimed that similar shadow traces existed in Mohenjo-Daro, silhouettes on some walls, as if there had been a sudden burst of light. However, these claims were never fully proven. The scientific community vehemently rejected Davenport's theory. Radiation measurements were taken. The alleged high levels could not be detected. The glass formations could be explained by lightning strikes or intense fires. The claim of radiation traces on skeletons was never confirmed. But the question remained, if this was a natural disaster, why hadn't people fled? Floods come slowly. Earthquakes give warning signs, but in Mohenjo-Daro, people were frozen as if they had received no warning.
A mother was still trying to protect her baby. Walkers in the streets were still about to take their next steps. This pointed to a sudden and unpredictable catastrophe. Close your eyes and go back to that day. Thousands of years ago, these streets were alive. Trade was taking place in the market. Children were playing. Women were preparing dinner. And suddenly, perhaps before they even had a chance to scream, the sky lit up. A blinding light enveloped everything. The temperature was so high that bricks melted. And then, silence. Today, the silent streets of Mohenjo-Daro still try to whisper what happened there that day. Those glass-like bricks gleaming in the sun hold a secret. Perhaps the answer lies in ancient Indian texts. Perhaps those terrifying weapons described in the Mahabharata were not just legend. Perhaps Mohenjo-Daro is a silent witness to that ancient nuclear war.
About 600 kilometers northeast of Mohenjo-Daro, in another corner of the Indus Valley, in the early 1920s, British archaeologist Sir John Marshall would make another discovery. But this time, he was greeted not by the sounds of digging, but by a profound silence. Harappa, the twin city of the Indus Valley civilization. And like its sibling Mohenjo-Daro, it too had mysteriously died. Interestingly, Harappa's existence had actually been known for centuries, but no one understood what it was. The local people thought those massive piles of bricks were the ruins of an old fortress. In the 1800s, when British engineers were building a railway, they laid Harappa's bricks on the tracks. The remains of a civilization thousands of years old were buried under the railway lines. No one will ever know how much information was lost. When Marshall and his team began excavations in 1921, the scene that emerged resembled Mohenjo-Daro. The same planned streets, the same sewer system, the same two-story houses. But there was a difference. Harappa seemed older than Mohenjo-Daro. Some layers stretched back to the dawn of civilization. This city was perhaps the first major metropolis of the Indus Valley. As excavations progressed, archaeologists noticed something strange. In some areas of Harappa, there were traces of the city being rebuilt. It was as if a disaster had occurred, people had returned and rebuilt the city. But after the last rebuilding, no one had ever come back. The city had breathed its last and never awakened again. In 1946, archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler made a surprising discovery in Harappa. He came across mass graves in the city streets, 39 skeletons huddled together in haphazard positions, some face down, some on their backs, some lying as if trying to escape. Wheeler thought this was the result of a massacre. Perhaps the city had been invaded. However, another detail weakened this theory. Most of the skeletons showed no gunshot wounds, their skulls unbroken, their ribs unpierced. So how had these people died? Wheeler spent the rest of his life trying to answer this question, but never found a definitive answer.
So what could have done it? In the late 1970s, British researcher David Davenport examined Mohenjo-Daro for years. He examined the city's structure and mapped the distribution of destruction, and his conclusion caused a great stir in the scientific world. Mohenjo-Daro was the very center of a nuclear explosion. The evidence Davenport presented in his book, Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC, was astonishing. There was an area in the center of the city, about 50 meters in diameter. Everything in this area had been completely destroyed, as if it had evaporated. There is a similar area in Hiroshima, Ground Zero, the center of the explosion. There, too, everything had evaporated, only burnt shadows remained on the walls. Davenport claimed that similar shadow traces existed in Mohenjo-Daro, silhouettes on some walls, as if there had been a sudden burst of light. However, these claims were never fully proven.
The scientific community vehemently rejected Davenport's theory. Radiation measurements were taken. The alleged high levels could not be detected. The glass formations could be explained by lightning strikes or intense fires. The claim of radiation traces on skeletons was never confirmed. But the question remained, if this was a natural disaster, why hadn't people fled? Floods come slowly. Earthquakes give warning signs, but in Mohenjo-Daro, people were frozen as if they had received no warning. A mother was still trying to protect her baby. Walkers in the streets were still about to take their next steps. This pointed to a sudden and unpredictable catastrophe. Close your eyes and go back to that day. Thousands of years ago, these streets were alive. Trade was taking place in the market. Children were playing. Women were preparing dinner. And suddenly, perhaps before they even had a chance to scream, the sky lit up. A blinding light enveloped everything. The temperature was so high that bricks melted. And then, silence. Today, the silent streets of Mohenjo-Daro still try to whisper what happened there that day. Those glass-like bricks gleaming in the sun hold a secret. Perhaps the answer lies in ancient Indian texts. Perhaps those terrifying weapons described in the Mahabharata were not just legend. Perhaps Mohenjo-Daro is a silent witness to that ancient nuclear war.
About 600 kilometers northeast of Mohenjo-Daro, in another corner of the Indus Valley, in the early 1920s, British archaeologist Sir John Marshall would make another discovery. But this time, he was greeted not by the sounds of digging, but by a profound silence. Harappa, the twin city of the Indus Valley civilization. And like its sibling Mohenjo-Daro, it too had mysteriously died. Interestingly, Harappa's existence had actually been known for centuries, but no one understood what it was. The local people thought those massive piles of bricks were the ruins of an old fortress. In the 1800s, when British engineers were building a railway, they laid Harappa's bricks on the tracks. The remains of a civilization thousands of years old were buried under the railway lines. No one will ever know how much information was lost. When Marshall and his team began excavations in 1921, the scene that emerged resembled Mohenjo-Daro. The same planned streets, the same sewer system, the same two-story houses. But there was a difference. Harappa seemed older than Mohenjo-Daro. Some layers stretched back to the dawn of civilization. This city was perhaps the first major metropolis of the Indus Valley. As excavations progressed, archaeologists noticed something strange. In some areas of Harappa, there were traces of the city being rebuilt. It was as if a disaster had occurred, people had returned and rebuilt the city. But after the last rebuilding, no one had ever come back. The city had breathed its last and never awakened again. In 1946, archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler made a surprising discovery in Harappa. He came across mass graves in the city streets, 39 skeletons huddled together in haphazard positions, some face down, some on their backs, some lying as if trying to escape. Wheeler thought this was the result of a massacre. Perhaps the city had been invaded. However, another detail weakened this theory. Most of the skeletons showed no gunshot wounds, their skulls unbroken, their ribs unpierced. So how had these people died? Wheeler spent the rest of his life trying to answer this question, but never found a definitive answer. David Davenport made similar claims. In his 1979 book, he wrote that some of the skeletons bore traces of radiation similar to those of Hiroshima victims. According to Davenport, these traces were direct evidence of a nuclear explosion. But again, detailed scientific data was missing. Which laboratory measured it? What methods were used? These questions remained unanswered. The scientific world was skeptical of these claims because radiation measurement is a sensitive task. Elements such as uranium and thorium, which occur naturally in bones,
always show a certain radioactivity. Natural radioactive minerals found in soil can leach into bones over thousands of years. This causes the skeletons to show higher than normal radiation, but this is a natural process, not a nuclear explosion. In the 1980s, independent researchers wanted to re-examine the Mohenjo-Daro skeletons, but they encountered a big problem. Most of the skeletons were missing. Some are in museums, some are in private collections, and some have never been recorded. Tests on the remaining samples yielded a surprising result. Radiation levels were normal. So where then did Gorbowski and Davenport's claims come from? One possibility was incorrect measurement. Radiation detectors used in the 1960s were not as sensitive as they are today. Natural radiation from the soil may have been erroneously recorded as high. Or perhaps the skeletons were found in soil containing radioactive minerals. Another possibility was deliberate misinformation. During the Cold War, there was much speculation about nuclear weapons. Some authors may have wanted to attract attention with sensational claims. The publication of Gorbowski's article in the Soviet Union was also notable. Maybe there was a political agenda. David Davenport made similar claims. In his 1979 book, he wrote that some of the skeletons bore traces of radiation similar to those of Hiroshima victims. According to Davenport, these traces were direct evidence of a nuclear explosion. But again, detailed scientific data was missing. Which laboratory measured it? What methods were used? These questions remained unanswered. The scientific world was skeptical of these claims because radiation measurement is a sensitive task. Elements such as uranium and thorium, which occur naturally in bones, always show a certain radioactivity. Natural radioactive minerals found in soil can leach into bones over thousands of years. This causes the skeletons to show higher than normal radiation, but this is a natural process, not a nuclear explosion. In the 1980s, independent researchers wanted to re-examine the Mohenjo-Daro skeletons, but they encountered a big problem. Most of the skeletons were missing. Some are in museums, some are in private collections, and some have never been recorded. Tests on the remaining samples yielded a surprising result. Radiation levels were normal. So where then did Gorbowski and Davenport's claims come from? One possibility was incorrect measurement. Radiation detectors used in the 1960s were not as sensitive as they are today. Natural radiation from the soil may have been erroneously recorded as high. Or perhaps the skeletons were found in soil containing radioactive minerals. Another possibility was deliberate misinformation. During the Cold War, there was much speculation about nuclear weapons. Some authors may have wanted to attract attention with sensational claims. The publication of Gorbowski's article in the Soviet Union was also notable. Maybe there was a political agenda.
But despite all this, some researchers still believe in radiation anomalies. Italian researcher Ettore Vincenti claimed to have made new measurements at Mohenjo-Daro in the 1990s. According to the results, there was radiation above the natural level in certain areas of the city. However, this was not enough for a nuclear explosion. Even Vincenti acknowledged that it probably came from natural sources. Modern science is very clear about radioactivity. If there was a nuclear explosion, certain isotopes would be left behind, especially artificial radioactive elements such as cesium-137 and strontium-90. However, none of these elements were found in Mohenjo-Daro. This seriously weakens the nuclear explosion theory. Close your eyes and think. If there really was a nuclear explosion, would we still be able to see its traces today? In Hiroshima, radiation can still be measured 70 years later. At the Trinity test site, trinitite is still radioactive, but there is nothing in Mohenjo-Daro.
This means either the explosion didn't happen or it wiped out everything for thousands of years. Today, scientists have largely rejected radiation claims. However, the debate is not completely over. There is still some mysterious data. The high levels in some skeletons cannot be fully explained. Maybe in the future, with more advanced technologies, we will learn the truth. What we know for now is this. Radiation claims remain largely unproven, but it has not been completely refuted. The secret of Mohenjo-Daro has slipped from our grasp once again. Only questions remain. In the mid-20th century, in the deserts of New Mexico, humanity witnessed perhaps one of its most significant moments in history. On the morning of July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the first nuclear weapons test, codenamed Trinity, was conducted. The explosion was so powerful that it could be seen from 100 kilometers away. The mushroom cloud reached a height of 10 kilometers. The center of the explosion reached 10 million degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. Following this terrifying moment, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific leader of the Manhattan Project, made an unforgettable quote from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am death, destroyer of worlds." These words forge a mysterious bridge between ancient Indian texts and the modern nuclear age. It is known that Oppenheimer learned Sanskrit and had a deep interest in Indian philosophy. During his years as a professor at the University of Berkeley, he learned enough Sanskrit to read the Bhagavad Gita in its original language. He described this text as indispensable for understanding the human soul. But there is an even more interesting detail in Oppenheimer's words. Years later, in an interview, while discussing the Trinity test, he said, "We knew it was the first nuclear explosion in modern times." The first in modern times. This choice of words became a significant clue for some researchers. Could Oppenheimer have believed that similar explosions may have occurred in ancient times?
The green glass layer that formed in the desert during the Trinity test surprised scientists. This glass was called trinitite and was formed from sand melting and vitrifying under extreme heat. Could claims that similar glass formations were found near Mohenjo-Daro and in various ancient regions of the world have piqued Oppenheimer's interest? Oppenheimer's personal library contained numerous books on Indian mythology and ancient weapons. During the Manhattan Project, he is known to have regularly read passages from the Bhagavad Gita. It was as if this ancient text was helping him understand the terrifying weapon he was working on. According to some records, Oppenheimer mentioned descriptions of weapons in the Mahabharata in private conversations with colleagues after the Trinity test. He is rumored to have said, "Some of these descriptions are surprisingly familiar," but these conversations were never officially recorded. Isidore Rabi, a physicist and one of Oppenheimer's closest friends, said that his interest in Indian philosophy was not only spiritual, but also a technical curiosity. According to Rabi, Oppenheimer thought that the descriptions of weapons in ancient texts were too detailed to be merely figments of the imagination. So what exactly is written in the Mahabharata? The passages describing the use of the Brahmastra seem to depict the effects of nuclear explosions almost step by step. First a dazzling light, then intense heat, then a terrible explosion, and finally long-lasting radiation-like effects. Oppenheimer's phrase, "first in modern times," was perhaps just a polite expression, an attempt to pay homage to ancient wisdom. Or perhaps he knew something deeper. Perhaps the scientists of the Manhattan Project were more inspired by ancient texts in their work.
Even the name of the Trinity test is said to be connected to Indian mythology. The Hindu Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, represents the powers of creation, preservation, and destruction.
Although Oppenheimer claimed to have taken the name from a poem by John Donne, some believe it's a reference to the Hindu Trinity. The coordinates of the test site, the design of the bomb, the timing of the explosion, everything was calculated down to the finest detail. But perhaps Oppenheimer had another calculation in mind, the possibility that humanity had discovered this power before. Now close your eyes and imagine that morning, the silence of the desert, the tension of the scientists, the countdown, and then that terrifying light. What was going through Oppenheimer's mind? Perhaps he was thinking of the same horror experienced by other people thousands of years ago in another desert. In the misty desert of the Trinity test, Oppenheimer's famous words hung in the air. "Now I am death, the destroyer of worlds." But where did these words come from? And why had a man who had detonated an atomic bomb taken refuge in a millennia-old Indian sacred text? Let's take a closer look at that book, the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is actually a small but extremely important part of the vast Mahabharata epic we mentioned earlier. It is a profound philosophical discourse, approximately 700 verses long, set on a battlefield. At the center of the story is a warrior prince named Arjuna. He commands a vast army, but as the battle is about to begin, he's horrified to see his relatives, teachers, and friends on the other side. He drops his bow and says, "I cannot do this. What good will winning this battle do me? What meaning will victory have if I kill my loved ones?"
It is at this very moment that Krishna, who is driving his chariot, in fact the human form of the god Vishnu, turns to him and begins to speak. What Krishna tells Arjuna is not just a lesson in the psychology of war, but a profound philosophy on the nature of the universe, time, death, and duty. And it is from this moment, the most dramatic moment of this conversation, that Oppenheimer's famous words come. Krishna reveals his divine form to show Arjuna the true structure of the universe. This moment is one of the most striking parts of the Gita. Krishna suddenly transforms into an infinite being, a cosmic form with hundreds of mouths, thousands of eyes, containing all times and all worlds within itself. Arjuna trembles at this sight. What he sees is so vast, so terrifying that he cannot breathe. And Krishna tells him, "I am time, the great destroyer of worlds. All the warriors you face here, whether they fight or not, are already destined to die. I have already destroyed them. You are merely a tool, Arjuna." Now think about it. Oppenheimer was watching the explosion of the most destructive weapon humanity had ever created in the New Mexico desert when this very scene played out in his mind. As that mushroom cloud rose into the sky, perhaps he felt like Arjuna standing before that cosmic form of Krishna. Perhaps instead of asking, "What have I done?" he was searching for the answer, "I was merely a tool." But Oppenheimer's interest in the Bhagavad Gita went back much further than Trinity. During his years teaching at the University of Berkeley, he took private lessons from a Sanskrit expert named Arthur Ryder. Every week after his classes, he would go to Ryder's office and read ancient Indian texts together. When he first read the Gita, he was deeply moved. In a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "This book is very special to me. It contains answers to the deepest questions of the human soul." So what else is there in the Gita related to nuclear war? Actually, the lines that follow the passage Oppenheimer quoted are just as striking. Krishna, describing to Arjuna how worlds are destroyed, uses this description, "a brilliance like the rising of 1,000 suns in the sky at once." 1,000 suns. Could there be a better metaphor to describe the light of a nuclear explosion? Or the descriptions of weapons in other parts of the Mahabharata. When the Brahmastra is used, the text reads, "The sky split open, the mountains trembled, the waters boiled. Then a terrible fire arose and consumed everything."
The bodies of the warriors became unrecognizable, their hair and nails fell off. This is almost identical to the symptoms of radiation exposure.
Oppenheimer carried a small pocket edition of the Bhagavad Gita with him throughout the Manhattan Project. In difficult moments, during breaks, he would take out this book and read a few pages. The other scientists on the project found this strange. Why would a physicist be so interested in a millennia-old mystical text? Perhaps the answer lies in this. Oppenheimer understood the moral dimension of his work. That bomb wasn't just metal and uranium. It was a force that could bring about humanity's own end. And the Bhagavad Gita offered him a kind of consolation. Krishna's teaching was, the universe already operates within a certain order. You are merely a part of that order. Do your duty, leave the consequences to the gods. But did this consolation work perfectly? No. The rest of Oppenheimer's life was spent with a deep sense of guilt and regret. In an interview years after the Trinity test, with tears in his eyes, he said, "At that moment, we knew that the world would never be the same again. Some people laughed, some cried, but we all knew that something had broken." There's another interesting parallel in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna tells Arjuna, the wise man is not concerned with the fruit of the action, he only performs the action. The scientists of the Manhattan Project tried to do exactly that. They focused solely on solving the scientific problem without considering the consequences of the bomb. But when the result came, the fruit was so bitter that no one wanted to touch it. Now close your eyes and think back to that morning of the Trinity test. Oppenheimer, just minutes before the explosion, is looking up at the sky from a trench dug into the desert sands. Perhaps at that moment he is imagining that colossal cosmic form of Krishna, a being with thousands of eyes, hundreds of mouths, containing all of time and space within it. And that being says to him, "You are merely an instrument. This was going to happen anyway." Then the countdown begins. 10, 900s, 8. With each number, his heart beats a little faster. 5, 4, 3, and then that light, that terrifying, beautiful, divine light, as if 1,000 suns had risen at once. And the only thing going through Oppenheimer's mind is the words heard thousands of years ago by a prince sitting in a chariot. "Now I am death, destroyer of worlds." Does this mean Oppenheimer believed in ancient nuclear warfare? Perhaps not. Perhaps he was simply finding some solace in the idea that humanity might have possessed this terrifying power before. Perhaps when he said, "the first in modern times," he was truly referring to an ancient truth. Or perhaps it was all just a profound metaphor, proof that human nature, its helplessness in the face of power, has remained unchanged for millennia. In the pages of Mahabharata, Brahmastra is just the beginning. Ancient Indian texts mention dozens of weapons, each with their own unique form of destruction coming from different gods. And the scariest and most mysterious of these weapons is the weapon of Shiva, the god of destruction, Pashupatastra. Even when you hear the name of this weapon, you get goosebumps, because according to the texts, Pashupatastra doesn't just destroy enemies, it erases the entire creation. A power that can stop the sky, the earth, the seas, and even time itself. In the Mahabharata, it is written, "When this weapon is used, all the elements of the universe are corrupted. The fire becomes unquenchable, the winds become poisonous, the waters boil." So who could use this weapon? According to the texts, only the greatest warriors. And even that warrior had to meditate for years, obtaining Shiva's personal approval before wielding the weapon. Because using Pashupatastra in the wrong hands could destroy not only the enemy, but the entire world. In the Mahabharata, Arjuna goes to the top of the Himalayas to retrieve this weapon. There, among the glaciers, he meditates for months to find Shiva. Finally, Shiva appears to him and says, "I give you this weapon, but do not use it against a light enemy,
because when this weapon is used, nothing lives on the earth. Everything turns to ashes.
The description of the weapon is also extremely interesting. The text reads, "When Pashupatastra was released, the sky would glow with a red light. Then there would be a noise as if thousands of lightning bolts had struck at once. Then everything would go silent. Leaves would fall from the trees, birds would crash from the sky, the water would evaporate, and then there would be nothing left." Does this description remind you of anything? The electromagnetic pulse of a nuclear explosion? The increase in temperature? The subsequent radiation? How could an ancient writer, thousands of years ago, describe such a thing in such detail? But there's an even stranger thing. In the texts, Pashupatastra is mentioned as a weapon of opposition. If used accidentally or maliciously, another divine weapon will be required to stop it, just like the deterrence concept of modern nuclear weapons. When both sides have weapons, no one dares to use them. There is a scene in Mahabharata that is truly chilling. Two great warriors, Arjuna and Ashwathama, simultaneously throw the Brahmastra against each other. The two weapons collide in the air, and so much energy is released that the universe is about to be destroyed. At that moment, sage Vyasa intervenes and shouts to the warriors, "Stop! Withdraw the weapons, otherwise everything will be destroyed." Arjuna manages to withdraw his weapon because he is strong, but Ashwathama cannot. The gun is out of control. As a last resort, he diverts the gun and points it at an unborn baby, his enemy's grandchild. This baby will be stillborn under a radiation-like effect, but is miraculously brought back to life.
When you turn the darkest pages of Mahabharata, you come across the name of a weapon from which there is only one way to escape: surrender. Put down your weapons, take off your armor, lie down, and stop fighting. This weapon is called Narayanastra, the weapon of the guardian god Vishnu, or his avatar Narayana. Close your eyes and imagine that moment. You are on the dusty battlefield of Kurukshetra. Thousands of warriors are fighting. Then, suddenly, you see a flash in the distance. Someone threw Narayanastra. What happens at that moment? According to what is written in the texts, the sky suddenly fills with thousands of fiery arrows. But these are no ordinary arrows. They move as if they were alive. They go after the fleeing warriors. He who hides, they find him. Those who continue to fight, they pour down on them like rain. It is written in the Mahabharata, these arrows chose their own targets. No armor could stop them, no shield could block them, and the scariest part was that each person who tried to fight them increased the power of the weapon many times over. Now think about it. Nowadays, there are smart missiles, weapons that choose their own targets, go after those who escape, and follow their heat signature. Technologies developed in the 1990s, but Mahabharata was written thousands of years ago. On the battlefield, Krishna, knowing the secret of this weapon, shouts to the Pandava army, "Drop your weapons, take off your armor, lie down." The warriors look at him in surprise. Laying down weapons in the middle of war? Isn't this suicide? But Krishna insists, "Stop fighting. This is your only salvation." And the warriors obey him, no matter how strange it may seem. They lay down their weapons, take off their armor, and lie face down on the ground.
And the miracle happens. Narayanastra's fiery arrows pass over them, but it won't hurt. It's as if he doesn't see people lying on the ground, surrendering. But every warrior who resists and continues to fight is instantly destroyed by those arrows. This concept bears a frightening resemblance to the rules of modern warfare. A soldier who surrenders cannot be shot at. An army that raises a white flag cannot be attacked. But the one who keeps fighting is the target. Thousands of years ago, this was exactly the working principle of Narayanastra. But there is an even stranger thing. Other features of Narayanastra are also described in the text. When this weapon is used, the air becomes so hot that even breathing becomes difficult. The warrior's armor melts, their skin burns, and the scariest part is that even after the weapon is gone, those left on the ground will suffer for days. Think of Hiroshima, that terrible explosion of light. Then came the heat wave, heat that melts metal and burns skin. And then radiation, pain that lasted for days and weeks, hair loss, body collapse. Narayanastra's description almost perfectly describes the effects of a nuclear explosion. There's another detail mentioned in the text. Krishna tells Arjuna, "Never use Narayanastra against a minor enemy, for this weapon, once unleashed, destroys not only its target, but everything in that area. The land remains dead for 7 generations." That number again, 7 generations, approximately 150 to 200 years. Think Chernobyl, think Fukushima. There is still no life in those areas. The soil is still poisonous. People cannot enter. Maybe in 200 years, maybe.
One of the most interesting details about Narayanastra is that this weapon can only be used once. If used a second time against the same person, this time the weapon returns to its user. It's like the gun has a memory. Once mercy is shown, a second attack is unforgivable. This parallels the nuclear deterrence doctrine, mutually certain destruction, mutual assured destruction. If both sides have nuclear weapons, if one uses them, the other will too. Conclusion? Both sides perish. Perhaps this return mechanism in ancient texts was describing the same truth in a different language. Another feature of Narayanastra is described in the texts. This weapon is non-recallable. Once launched, it can no longer be stopped. Even if the user regrets it, it is too late. The gun does not stop until it reaches its target. It's like a modern nuclear missile. Once you press the button, the process has started. You have no chance of getting it back. The missile is in the air, and in a few minutes, a city will be destroyed. So who can use Narayanastra? According to the texts, they are just calm, controlled, and wise warriors. Someone with anger in his heart cannot use this weapon, because Narayanastra reacts to the emotions of its user. If used in anger, it gets out of control. This fits perfectly with the modern management philosophy of nuclear weapons. Even the president cannot launch a nuclear missile by himself. There are codes, there are protocols, there are cold-blooded chains of command. Because in a moment of anger, with one wrong decision, the world can be destroyed. Now open your eyes and look around you. Perhaps these texts were not just imaginary. Perhaps thousands of years ago, someone used this weapon, and its consequences were so terrible that the last living humans buried it in mythology. He made the weapon of the gods to say, "Never again." Or maybe ancient writers just had incredible imaginations. But then, why does every detail match modern nuclear weapons? Why does heat, light, radiation, control mechanisms all exist?
The third common feature, perhaps the most terrifying, long-term effects. The texts describe what happened after the weapons were used. The earth remained dead. Nothing grew for 7 generations. People who entered that area became ill. Their hair fell out. Their children were born deformed. These are the classic symptoms of radiation sickness. The same things were seen after Chernobyl, after Fukushima. Hair loss, skin lesions, genetic damage, infertility. And these effects continue not only in those who were there at the time, but also in subsequent generations. The land around Chernobyl is still uninhabitable. Perhaps 200 years from now,
7 generations. Fourth common feature, mushroom cloud. Yes, mushroom cloud. In the Mahabharata, a gigantic column of smoke rising into the sky after the use of certain weapons is described. The smoke rose towards the sky, then expanded and took the shape of an umbrella. An umbrella shape, the most iconic image of a nuclear explosion. Fifth common feature, sound. The texts mention the terrifying noise heard during the use of the weapons, like thousands of lightning bolts striking at once, mountains cracked, rivers overflowed, and then a deep silence. Birds did not sing, the wind did not blow, everything froze. Witnesses of the Trinity test speak of that strange silence that followed the explosion. After the shock wave passed, it was as if nature had held its breath. There was no sound. Then, slowly, from a distance, the howling of the wind began to emerge. Sixth common feature, electromagnetic effects. Some texts mention that when these weapons are used, compasses go astray and stars change their positions. What does modern science tell us? A nuclear explosion creates a massive electromagnetic pulse, EMP. This pulse disrupts electronic devices and affects magnetic fields.
Seventh common feature, and perhaps the most unsettling, control mechanisms. Almost all texts emphasize that these weapons should not be used in the wrong hands. Special training, divine approval, long meditations. Only certain individuals can use these weapons, and if misused, the weapon goes out of control and destroys everyone. The control system of modern nuclear weapons? Two-man rule, launch codes, specially trained operators, psychological tests. No leader can launch a nuclear missile alone. The system is designed to prevent a wrong decision. Eighth common feature, irreversibility. The texts repeatedly state once these weapons are launched, they cannot be recalled. Even if the user regrets it, it's too late. Like a nuclear missile, once you press the start button, the process begins. Ninth common characteristic, mutual destruction. The Mahabharata describes what would happen if two warriors used these weapons simultaneously. The universe was about to be destroyed. Everything would end. The Cold War's MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction Doctrine, if both sides used them, nobody would win. Both sides would be destroyed. 10th and final common characteristic, permanent mark. The texts mention that the places where these weapons were used remained marked. That land turned a different color. A surface as bright as glass was formed. Remember Trinity, the green glass layer that formed in the desert after the Trinity test. Sand melting and vitrifying due to extreme heat. Now, step back and look at this list. Light, heat, radiation, mushroom cloud, sound, electromagnetic effect, control mechanisms, irreversibility, mutual destruction, permanent scarring. 10 characteristics, all of them perfectly match modern nuclear weapons. How is this possible? If these are just figments of the imagination, why is every detail accurate? Were ancient writers predicting a future technology, or were they describing a past catastrophe?
Some researchers say these are exaggerated descriptions of volcanic eruptions, lightning, meteor impacts. Maybe. But then why are all these natural phenomena grouped under a single category of weapon? Why are they called weapons of the gods? And why are there such detailed rules about the control and use of these weapons? Other researchers say these are just ancient science fiction, the figment of the imagination of ancient times. Maybe. But then why couldn't even modern science fiction writers make such accurate descriptions until nuclear weapons were invented? The truth is, the descriptions of these weapons in the Mahabharata are either an incredible coincidence or proof of an incredible fact. There is no middle ground.
Either the ancient writers literally predicted a technology thousands of years in the future, which is almost impossible, or they were able to describe it in such detail because they saw this technology thousands of years ago. When you close the dusty pages of the Mahabharata, you realize another colossal epic awaits you. Its name, the Ramayana. Approximately 24,000 verses long, it is again one of the oldest and most sacred texts of Indian literature. And within it, there are descriptions of weapons almost identical to those in the Mahabharata. The story of the Ramayana seems simple. Prince Rama's wife, Sita, is kidnapped by the demon king, Ravana. Rama wages war on Ravana's island, Lanka, to rescue her. But within this simple story, there are terrifying descriptions of weapons spanning pages, and these descriptions are no different from those in the Mahabharata. The same light, the same heat, the same destruction. The oldest versions of the Ramayana date back to 500 to 300 BC, so it belongs to roughly the same period as the Mahabharata. Two separate epics, two different stories, but within them the same weapons, the same descriptions, as if both were speaking of the same reality. Close your eyes and imagine this scene. Thousands of years ago, in a village in northern India, an old man sits. His grandchildren are around him. After dinner, they gather around the fire, and the old man begins to tell a story. He speaks of a great war, of weapons that pierced the sky, of fires that destroyed cities, of lands that remained dead for 7 generations.
The children listen, their eyes wide with astonishment. "Grandpa, is this true?" they ask. The old man nods. "Yes, it happened a long time ago. But never forget, these weapons belonged to the gods, and if we humans use them again, the world will be destroyed." Perhaps that's how the Mahabharata was born. Perhaps those texts were describing a real catastrophe. Perhaps thousands of years ago, a civilization had gained this power and destroyed itself, and the last living humans buried the story in mythology as a warning to future generations. Or perhaps it's just imagination, ancient science fiction, the product of the creative genius of ancient writers. But what if it's not? What if thousands of years ago someone truly held this power? And what if the consequences were so horrific that the civilization was completely destroyed, leaving only mythological tales behind? This question is what takes us on this journey. The ancient Indian nuclear war theory is not just a conspiracy theory. There is some striking evidence, some inexplicable findings, and many coincidences. In the next 30 episodes, we will examine every piece of this mysterious story, from the dark secrets of the Mahabharata to the sudden disappearance of Mohenjo-Daro, from Oppenheimer's enigmatic words to glass plates found in the deserts, from scientific explanations to mythological interpretations. But remember, this is not just a story. This is perhaps humanity's greatest secret, or its greatest delusion. You will decide which it is. When you reach one of the most striking sections of the Ramayana, the pages almost burn in your hands. The burning of Lanka, Ravana's magnificent city reduced to ashes in a single night. And the description of this destruction is eerily similar to the description of a modern nuclear attack. Close your eyes and imagine that night. The island of Lanka gleams in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Golden gates, silver walls, 7 layers of ramparts. Ravana's palace rises defiantly to the sky. Thousands of people in the streets, lights, music, life. Then Rama's army arrives, but this is no ordinary army. The text reads, Rama decided to use special weapons he received from the gods because the walls of Lanka could not be conquered with ordinary arrows and spears.
Hanuman, the monkey warrior, makes the first attack on the city. He dips his tail in fire and begins to run through the streets of Lanka. But this is no ordinary fire. The descriptions in the text are astonishing. The fire was so hot that the stone walls melted. The golden doors vaporized. People's lungs burned when they breathed. A normal fire cannot melt stone. A normal fire cannot vaporize gold. But the heat of a nuclear explosion can. In the Trinity test, the sands near the blast center had turned vitrified. The desert sand had been exposed to such heat that it had become glass. The Ramayana continues, "As the fire spread, the sky turned crimson, then orange, then white. The light was so bright that night turned into day. Those who looked from afar had to close their eyes." This description perfectly matches the light phases of a thermonuclear explosion. First red light, then orange, then blinding white, and that brightness could be seen from tens of kilometers away. What happened to the people of Lanka? The text describes a terrifying event. People were running through the streets, but there was nowhere to escape. Some jumped into the river, but the water was boiling. Some took refuge in palaces, but the buildings were collapsing. And the most horrifying thing is that even those who escaped the fire fell ill and died a few days later. Radiation poisoning. The same thing seen after Hiroshima, after Nagasaki. Survivors of the first explosion contracted a mysterious illness a few days later. Their hair fell out, their skin was wounded, their internal organs crumbled, and no doctor could help them because no one knew what radiation was. In the Ramayana, Lakshmana, Rama's brother, says,
"This city is no longer habitable. The earth is poisoned. The water is undrinkable. Everyone who remains here will die." And indeed, the texts state that Lanka was abandoned after the war. No one continued to live on that island. But interestingly, the exact location of Lanka is unknown. Some say it is modern Sri Lanka. Others claim it is an island in Indonesia. According to some, Lanka was so damaged that it was swallowed by the ocean and sank. If Lanka really was subjected to a nuclear attack, what would we find in that area today? Traces of radiation, layers of glass, structures exposed to abnormally high temperatures. But the problem is, nobody is looking, because most scientists think these are just mythological stories. In the Ramayana, there is another scene after the burning of Lanka. Ravana stands in the middle of the city's ruins. Everything around him is ash, and looking up at the sky, he says, "This power should not have been stolen from the gods. We mortals cannot bear it." Perhaps this was an ancient warning. Perhaps the person who wrote the Ramayana was trying to leave a message for future generations. If you obtain this power, you will destroy yourselves. But we didn't listen. In the 20th century, we obtained the same power, and in the Trinity test, in Hiroshima, in Nagasaki, we created the same fire, the same light, the same heat, the same destruction. At the end of the Ramayana, Rama triumphs, but the text contains a sentence, "This victory was not celebrated like any other victory, because Rama knew the great price they had paid. In the ashes of Lanka, not only the enemies, but also innocents had burned." Oppenheimer said something similar after the Trinity test. "Now we're all sons of bitches." They had won. They had created the weapon that ended the war, but that weapon had also burned the innocence of humanity. Perhaps the Ramayana was telling exactly this story. A catastrophe that happened thousands of years ago, then buried in mythology. The burning of Lanka was not just a legend, it was the last night of a real city, a real civilization.
Or perhaps these were just coincidences. Perhaps the ancient writers used the most extreme descriptions to depict the horrors of war, and these descriptions coincidentally resembled modern nuclear attacks. But could there be so many coincidences? Light, heat, radiation, long-term effects, barren lands? Every detail fits. Each depiction speaks of a truth that modern science only discovered in the 20th century. Now consider this. If Lanka truly existed, if it truly suffered such an attack, where would it be today? At the bottom of the Indian Ocean? Beneath Sri Lanka? Or somewhere else entirely? And if it were found, what would we see? Vitrified earth? Traces of radiation? Bones exposed to high temperatures? When you close the pages of the Mahabharata and step into a modern archaeology lab, everything changes. Those mystical weapons, the wrath of the gods, the destructive fires, they are all suddenly relegated to the category of myth. Scientists turn to you and say, "These are just stories. The truth is much simpler." Open your eyes and enter the world of modern science. Here, everything has an explanation. The collapse of Mohenjo-Daro? Flood. High radiation and skeletons? Natural uranium deposits. Vitrified soil? Lightning strike. Every mystery is solved with an explanation. Or so it seems. The standard explanation for Mohenjo-Daro in modern archaeology is this. The Indus Valley civilization collapsed abruptly around 1900 BC, but it wasn't due to nuclear war, but natural disasters and climate change. The riverbed changed, agricultural lands dried up, people abandoned the city due to starvation. Simple, logical, scientific. But wait a minute. What did the first archaeologists excavating Mohenjo-Daro find in the 1920s? Skeletons lying in the streets as if they had been killed suddenly in the middle of a disaster. Some at their doorsteps, some on the stairs, some on the main road. No burial ceremonies, no funeral rituals. They just lay there, dead, in the street. British archaeologist Sir John Marshall wrote in 1931, "The condition of these skeletons is extremely strange. It's as if the city experienced a sudden catastrophe. People didn't even have a chance to escape."
In the following years, scientists studied these skeletons, and some strange findings emerged. In a study published in 1996, Italian researcher David Davenport claimed that some skeletons showed radiation levels 50 times higher than normal. He also said that in certain areas of the city, the stones and bricks were partially melted as if they had been exposed to very high temperatures. But mainstream science did not accept these findings. Why? Because the explanation was too unusual. Traces of radiation? It must have come from natural uranium deposits. Molten bricks? It must have been caused by a massive fire. Sudden death? It must have been from an epidemic or a sudden flood. The problem is, every explanation seems logical, but none quite fit. If it was a flood, why were only certain areas of the city affected? If it was an epidemic, why weren't the bodies buried? If it was a fire, why did some bricks completely melt while those right next to them remained intact? Indian scientist A. Gorbovsky wrote in 1966, "The findings at Mohenjo-Daro do not quite fit with the usual explanations. The temperature of the molten stones must be much higher than what a normal fire could produce, and the radiation levels are too high to be explained by natural sources." But the scientific community dismissed these ideas as absurd, because accepting them would mean accepting a much bigger problem. How could nuclear technology have existed in 2000 BC? This is where the contradiction of scientific explanations emerges. Modern science sees the evidence but cannot explain it, because the explanation would shatter the current understanding of history.
If Mohenjo-Daro was indeed subjected to a nuclear attack, then all history books would need to be rewritten.
Most scientists don't want to take that risk. It's easier to try to explain the findings with natural causes. But some scientists bravely ask different questions. What if what we call history is much more complex than it actually is? What if there are lost civilizations? What if societies with technologies we don't know about lived before us? In 1979, scientist Kesari Mohan Ganwali studied ancient Sanskrit texts and said, "The descriptions of weapons in these texts detail the effects of modern nuclear weapons. This cannot be a coincidence. Either these texts describe events that actually happened, or the ancient authors had an incredible imagination." But mainstream science didn't accept this. And today, if an academic comes out and says Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by nuclear war, their career is over. No serious journal will publish it. No university will take them seriously. Now think about it. Is science searching for the truth, or is it trying to preserve existing understanding? If the evidence doesn't fit the accepted theory, is the evidence wrong, or is the theory wrong? Modern archaeology has another explanation, the theory of exaggeration. That is, the idea that ancient writers exaggerated and magnified natural events in their descriptions. Perhaps those terrifying weapons in the Mahabharata were actually just great fires, but through centuries of retelling, they became legendary, transformed into godlike powers. This is a logical explanation, but there's still a problem. Why so much detail? Why light, heat, radiation, long-term effects, control mechanisms? Why are they all there? If these are just exaggerations, why does every detail match modern nuclear weapons? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Perhaps the ancient texts do describe a great catastrophe, but that catastrophe wasn't nuclear war, it was something else. A meteor strike, a massive volcanic eruption, or some other natural event we don't know about. Or perhaps mainstream science is wrong. Perhaps history is far more complex than we think. And perhaps, thousands of years ago, there was a civilization we don't know about. And that civilization destroyed itself. After the Trinity test, something was found in the New Mexico desert, a greenish, shiny glass-like substance. Scientists named it trinitite. It was formed when sand melted and vitrified due to the incredible heat of the nuclear explosion. On the surface, it's a shiny layer about half a centimeter thick. Now close your eyes and imagine another desert, thousands of kilometers away, in India, near Mohenjo-Daro. There, too, a similar glass layer is claimed to exist, greenish, shiny, as if exposed to very high temperatures. Ancient nuclear war theorists say these two glass layers are the same. Both are from a nuclear explosion. What we saw at Trinity also happened thousands of years ago in Mohenjo-Daro. But mainstream science rejects this claim. Why? Because glass formations can also occur naturally, and a nuclear explosion is not necessary for this. The first natural explanation, lightning. When lightning strikes the ground, the temperature can instantly rise to 30,000 degrees. This temperature melts the sand, turning it into glass. This formation is called fulgurite. It is frequently found in nature, especially in desert regions. Fulgurites are generally thin, branched, tube-shaped structures. When lightning strikes the ground, the energy travels downwards and melts the sand. As a result, glassy structures form that extend into the soil like roots. Scientists say the glass formations found near Mohenjo-Daro are probably fulgurites. That is, they were formed as a result of a lightning strike. They have nothing to do with trinitite. But there is a problem. Fulgurites are usually small, localized formations, a few centimeters wide, a few meters long.
However, the glass layer found near Mohenjo-Daro is claimed to spread over a wide area. This cannot be explained by a single lightning strike. The second natural explanation, volcanic activity. When volcanoes erupt, lava rises to the surface and melts the soil. Then, when it cools, glass-like structures such as obsidian or pumice are formed. Perhaps the glass near Mohenjo-Daro is from ancient volcanic activity. But there's a problem. There's no recent volcanic activity in the Indus Valley where Mohenjo-Daro is located. The nearest active volcano is thousands of kilometers away, and volcanic glasses have a different structure than trinitite or the alleged Mohenjo-Daro glass. Third explanation, forest fires. Very large, very hot forest fires can sometimes generate enough heat to melt the soil. Especially in dry desert regions, when dense vegetation burns, the temperature can reach 1,500 to 2,000 degrees. This can lead to glass formation. However, this temperature is not enough for the sand to completely vitrify. Sand begins to melt at around 1,700 degrees. But for a completely homogeneous glass formation, the temperature needs to rise above 2,000 degrees and remain at that level for a while. A normal fire cannot provide this. In the Trinity test, the temperature at the center of the eruption reached 8 million degrees Celsius. Even on the surface, temperatures can reach thousands of degrees in a matter of seconds. That's why trinitite is different from normal glass formations. It's much more homogeneous, much more widely distributed, and its structure is much more complex. In the 1990s, some researchers took soil samples from near Mohenjo-Daro. They analyzed these samples in the laboratory. The results were controversial. Some scientists found traces of high-temperature exposure in the samples, but others said these could be explained by natural processes. The problem is, the samples from Mohenjo-Daro were not tested in independent international laboratories. Most studies were done by small independent researchers, and the results were not accepted by major scientific journals.
So why? Why doesn't mainstream science take these findings seriously? There are two reasons. First, methodology. If you want to obtain a scientifically sound finding, you have to collect a large number of samples, have them tested in different laboratories, and put the results through a peer review process. This is an expensive and time-consuming process, and most independent researchers don't have the resources for this. The second reason is deeper: the paradigm. There's a widely accepted paradigm in the scientific community. Human civilization progressed linearly, from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, then to the Iron Age. Around 2000 BC, nuclear technology didn't exist. It couldn't have, because that would shatter the paradigm. If a scientist were to say Mohenjo-Daro was subjected to a nuclear attack, they would be questioning not just a theory, but the entire understanding of history. And the scientific community is very resistant to such radical ideas. But some scientists are more open-minded. For example, geologist Brad Steiger said in the 1970s, "Glass formations are certainly interesting. If they were indeed exposed to high temperatures and natural explanations are insufficient, then we should consider alternatives. But first, we need to collect more data." That's the scientific approach: to say, "I don't know," to do more research. But unfortunately, there hasn't been a comprehensive, independent geological survey of Mohenjo-Daro and its surroundings, because no one is funding it. Now let's look at another region, the Sahara Desert. In western Libya, there's something called Libyan desert glass. Yellowish, greenish, shiny pieces of glass spread over kilometers. It's estimated to have formed about 29 million years ago. The origin of this glass is controversial.
Some scientists say it was caused by a meteor impact. When a meteor enters the atmosphere or hits the surface, it generates such high heat that the sand melts and turns into glass. Others advocate the airburst theory, meaning the meteor exploded in the air before hitting the ground and the heat wave reached the surface. If a meteor impact can create glass, why can't the glass near Mohenjo-Daro also be the result of a meteor impact? This is a logical explanation. But then, why is there no crater in the same area? Meteor impacts usually leave large craters. No such crater has been found near Mohenjo-Daro. There's another group in the scientific world, the skeptics. They say, first, prove whether or not there is a layer of glass near Mohenjo-Daro. Because we don't have clear photographs or clear samples, we only have the claims of a few researchers. And this is the biggest problem. If there really is a large layer of glass near Mohenjo-Daro, why isn't it properly documented? Why can't we see it on Google Earth? Why aren't international archaeological teams studying it? The answer might be this. Perhaps that glass sheet isn't as large as claimed. Perhaps there are small, scattered fragments, and these can be explained by lightning strikes or other natural processes. Or perhaps there really is a large glass sheet, but nobody is looking for it, because looking for it means questioning the paradigm, and questioning the paradigm means risking one's career. Science sometimes works like that. Instead of searching for the truth, it prefers to stay in the safe zone. But history shows us that the greatest discoveries have been made by people who broke the paradigm.
Imagine walking through the quiet streets of Mohenjo-Daro. Around you are thousands of years-old brick walls, abandoned houses. Beneath your feet are the remnants of an ancient civilization. And in your hand, a Geiger counter. You turn on the device. Click, click, click. Normal background radiation. But then, at a certain point, the sounds speed up. Click, 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 click. Is something abnormal? This is the most controversial claim of the ancient Indian nuclear war theory, that skeletons and soil in Mohenjo-Daro contain radiation levels far higher than normal. If true, this would be strong evidence for the nuclear war theory. But is it true? In the 1990s, Italian researcher David Davenport made a surprising claim in his studies of Mohenjo-Daro. He said he detected radiation levels 50 times higher than normal in skeletons found in certain areas of the city. He also claimed that there was an area in the center of the city, like a zero point of an explosion. He observed that as you moved away from this point, the damage decreased. Davenport's findings generated considerable interest within the alternative history community. Here's the proof, they exclaimed. Mohenjo-Daro was subjected to a nuclear attack. But mainstream science reacted coldly to these claims. Why? First problem, methodology. Davenport's work was not tested in independent international laboratories. How were the measurements taken? What equipment was used? Were control samples taken? Did the results undergo peer review? There are no clear answers to these questions. For a scientific finding to be accepted, it must be reproducible. That is, when other scientists take samples from the same region and perform the same tests, they must obtain the same results. But in Mohenjo-Daro, no one has conducted a similar study after Davenport, or if they did, the results were not published.
If there is such a natural reactor near Mohenjo-Daro, it could explain these radiation levels. But again, detailed geological studies are needed to investigate this. Another possibility, a meteor impact. Large meteors carry high energy. When they hit the ground, they produce such high pressure and temperature that some elements can transform into radioactive isotopes. This is not as common as a nuclear explosion, but it can still leave detectable radiation. No crater has been found near Mohenjo-Daro, but perhaps the meteor exploded in mid-air, or the crater disappeared due to erosion over thousands of years. Now let's get to the critical question. If there really is high radiation, why doesn't an independent scientific team go and measure it?
The answer is complex. First, cost. The right equipment, expert staff, laboratory analyses, all of these are expensive. And who will fund it? Academic institutions don't give money to projects they find absurd. Private investors, on the other hand, want sensational results rather than scientific research. Second, access. Mohenjo-Daro is on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The Pakistani government tightly controls the excavations and work there. If you want to conduct research on nuclear war, obtaining permission can be difficult as it could damage the country's image. Thirdly, there's the career risk. If a scientist says they are conducting radiation research in Mohenjo-Daro, they may not be taken seriously by their colleagues. They might be accused of pursuing absurd theories. And in the academic world, reputation is everything. But there are some courageous researchers. For example, in 2008, a group of independent scientists tried to collect soil samples near Mohenjo-Daro, but the Pakistani authorities did not allow it. The project was suspended.
So, there isn't enough data to find out the truth. We only have controversial claims and denials. One side says, yes, there is high radiation. The other side says, no, these are unfounded claims. So, what are we going to do? Which side are we going to believe? The scientific approach is this. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If someone claims that Mohenjo-Daro was subjected to a nuclear attack, they must provide very strong evidence to support this claim. So far, this evidence is insufficient. Davenport's study does not meet scientific standards. There is no other independent research. Isotope analyses have not been conducted. As a result, the radiation claim remains in the unproven category. But unproven does not mean false. Perhaps in the future, with better technology and more resources, the truth will emerge. Perhaps there really is something abnormal at Mohenjo-Daro. Or perhaps it is all the result of natural processes. The only thing certain right now is more research is needed. But unfortunately, nobody is doing it. Close your eyes and go back thousands of years. In a small village, there are people sitting around the fire. An old storyteller tells his grandchildren about the Great War. The sky was split open that day, he says. 1,000 suns rose at once. The gods fought, and the earth trembled. The children listen, their eyes wide. "Grandpa, is this real?" they ask. The old man shakes his head. "Yes, kids, it happened a long time ago, but never forget." This is perhaps how Mahabharata was born. Perhaps those horrific depictions of weapons were actually versions of much simpler events that were enlarged by being told over the centuries. This is the strongest argument of mainstream science, mythological exaggeration. Think about it. In 1900 BC, a great fire broke out in Mohenjo-Daro, perhaps by accident, perhaps during an attack. The city burned. People died. It was a terrible disaster. A few survivors survived and told the story.
Second problem, natural radiation sources. There are naturally occurring regions on Earth with high radiation levels. The reasons for this may include underground uranium or thorium deposits, radon gas accumulation, or high doses of cosmic radiation. Ancient cities, in particular, may sometimes be built on top of such geological formations. Some parts of the Indian subcontinent have natural uranium deposits. In the state of Kerala, for example, the background radiation is 10 to 20 times higher than normal. People live there, healthy, because this radiation is natural and chronic. It wasn't caused by a sudden explosion. So, does the radiation in Mohenjo-Daro come from natural sources? To answer this question, detailed geological and radiological research is needed, but unfortunately, such a comprehensive study has not been conducted. The third problem, isotope analysis.
If there really was a nuclear explosion in Mohenjo-Daro, certain radioactive isotopes should be found, specifically cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium-239. These isotopes do not occur in nature. They are only formed as a result of nuclear reactions. After the Trinity test, these isotopes were found in the desert, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Chernobyl. Every nuclear event leaves a certain signature. If such isotopes are found in Mohenjo-Daro, then the possibility of a nuclear explosion increases. But so far, no one has announced that they have investigated these isotopes in samples taken from Mohenjo-Daro, or if they did, the results were negative and were not published. Fourth problem, half-life. Radioactive substances decay over time. Each isotope has a half-life. That is, after a certain period of time, it loses half of its radioactivity. For example, the half-life of cesium-137 is 30 years. So after 30 years, half of its radioactivity remains. After 60 years, a quarter. After 90 years, an eighth.
Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed approximately 4,000 years ago. If there was a nuclear explosion then, most radioactive isotopes should have already decayed. However, isotopes with very long half-lives, like plutonium-239 with a half-life of 24,000 years, can still be detected. But again, the same problem. Nobody has searched for these isotopes, or if they have, the results haven't been published. Fifth problem, contamination. Mohenjo-Daro has been excavated since the 1920s. Hundreds of archaeologists, thousands of tourists have walked this site for decades. In the modern era, there is low-level radiation in the atmosphere from nuclear tests. The samples may have been mixed with modern contamination. In a scientific study, it is very important to distinguish this type of contamination. But has this issue been addressed in Davenport's study? It's not clear. Now, let's look at it from another angle. Let's say there is indeed high radiation in Mohenjo-Daro. Does this necessarily mean nuclear war? No. There may be other explanations. For example, a natural nuclear reactor. Yes, you heard right. In nature, under certain conditions, uranium deposits can spontaneously undergo a chain reaction. In Gabon, in the Oklo region, a natural reactor like this operated 2 billion years ago. Geologists were shocked when they discovered it. Nature was capable of producing nuclear energy.
Fire rained down from the sky, he said. Everything burned. No one survived. It's a regular expression. But as this story was passed down from generation to generation, each narrator added a little more and enlarged it a little more. The sentence, "Fire rained down from the sky," became, "The sky split open, and the fire of the gods descended to the earth." 100 years later, the story has gotten even bigger. It is now said that thousands of suns rose at the same time. 200 years later, the weapons of the gods were used, and the world was almost destroyed. And lo, a simple fire disaster turned into a mythological war of the gods. Does this make sense? Definitely. Throughout history, every society has buried major disasters in mythology. The story of Noah's Ark probably describes an actual flood, but it is so exaggerated that it is said that the whole world was underwater. The legend of Atlantis perhaps describes the destruction of a real island as a result of a volcanic eruption, but it was magnified so much that it became a great civilization that sank in one night and one day. The same may be true of Mahabharata. Perhaps those divine weapons were actually the most advanced war technologies of that time. Large bows, fiery arrows, flammable materials similar to Greek fire. But as they were told over the centuries, they became weapons of the gods. So why are the depictions so similar to modern nuclear weapons? The answer is simple: coincidence. and the limitations of human perception. "Fire rained down from the sky," he said. "Everything burned. No one survived." It's a regular expression. But as this story was passed down from generation to generation, each narrator added a little more and enlarged it a little more. The sentence, "Fire rained down from the sky," became, "The sky split open and the fire of the gods descended to the earth." 100 years later, the story has gotten even bigger. It is now said that thousands of suns rose at the same time. 200 years later, the weapons of the gods were used and the world was almost destroyed. And lo, a simple fire disaster turned into a mythological war of the gods. Does this make sense? Definitely. Throughout history, every society has buried major disasters in mythology. The story of Noah's Ark probably describes an actual flood, but it is so exaggerated that it is said that the whole world was underwater. The legend of Atlantis perhaps describes the destruction of a real island as a result of a volcanic eruption, but it was magnified so much that it became a great civilization that sank in one night and one day. The same may be true of Mahabharata. Perhaps those divine weapons were actually the most advanced war technologies of that time. Large bows, fiery arrows, flammable materials similar to Greek fire. But as they were told over the centuries, they became weapons of the gods. So why are the depictions so similar to modern nuclear weapons? The answer is simple: coincidence and the limitations of human perception.
Mythological exaggeration theorists say because human imagination is universal, every culture uses similar imagery when imagining the worst catastrophe. Fire, light, destruction, these are archetypal symbols. This makes sense. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious supports this. Perhaps all of humanity shares the same symbols of fear, and these symbols reappear repeatedly in mythological stories. But again, a question. Why then did Oppenheimer quote from the Bhagavad Gita? Why did he say, "first in modern times"? Was it just a love of literature, or did he really see a parallel? Perhaps Oppenheimer saw the tragedy of human nature. He found in a text written thousands of years ago a description of the horror created by modern man. This shows the universality of human nature, not technology. In every age, man strives to obtain the most destructive power, and in every age, this power frightens him. Another argument of the mythological exaggeration theory: psychological need. People want to give meaning to great catastrophes. Why did this happen? It seeks an answer to the question, and the easiest answer is the wrath of the gods. For the people of Mohenjo-Daro, the destruction of their city was incomprehensible. Perhaps a flood, perhaps a fire, perhaps an epidemic. But why? Why us? This is where mythology comes in. You say, because the gods were angry, because there was a great war. Now there's an explanation. Suffering gains meaning. And this explanation grows as it is passed down from generation to generation, because each generation wants to make the story even more dramatic, to make it more impressive, more unforgettable. In the end, a simple disaster story turns into a colossal epic like the Mahabharata. And in the 21st century, we look at this epic and ask, was this real? Theorists of mythological exaggeration say, no, it wasn't real, but this doesn't mean the story is worthless. The Mahabharata reflects humanity's deep fears about war, power, and destruction. This is a psychological reality, even if it is not a historical document.
Oppenheimer saw this reality. In the Trinity test, humanity came face to face with its oldest fear, and those words from the Bhagavad Gita express precisely that fear. Now I am death. Humanity had taken the power to bring about its own end. So, is ancient nuclear war real? According to the mythological exaggeration theory, no.
But the story tells a universal truth. Humanity always strives to obtain the most destructive power, and it always fears that power. Perhaps that is the real message of the Mahabharata. The weapons of the gods are not for mortals. That is, some powers are very dangerous. Some doors should not be opened. But we opened that door in 1945, and now those terrifying descriptions we read in ancient texts are no longer a fantasy. They are real. Perhaps thousands of years from now, our era will also become mythology. Future generations will read the Trinity test and ask, was this real or was it an exaggeration? And perhaps future scientists will say, no, this is just a myth. 21st century humans couldn't possibly possess such a destructive weapon, because then they would have destroyed themselves. But we know that it is true, and perhaps the people who wrote the Mahabharata knew the same thing, because they saw it too. Perhaps in a different form, with a different technology, but they saw the destruction. Or perhaps it's all just a dream, a powerful, universal, terrifying dream, but still a dream. The only way to know the truth? More research, more excavation, more scientific analysis. But so far, no one is doing that, because whatever the result, neither side will be satisfied. If evidence is found, history books will have to be rewritten. If not, it will be said that we chased after nonsense. That's why the ancient Indian nuclear war remains a mystery, neither fully proven nor fully disproven. It just sits there on the pages of ancient texts, and it whispers to us.
Perhaps we were real, perhaps we weren't, but our message is true. Power demands responsibility, and destruction is always a possibility. We have reached the end of this journey. For 20 chapters, we have examined ancient texts, debated scientific explanations, and investigated evidence. And now, the decision is yours. Did a nuclear war really happen thousands of years ago? Or is this a powerful myth created by humanity's collective unconscious? We don't know the answer, and perhaps we never will. But one thing we do know, whether it's true or a legend, the Mahabharata's message is valid. Because in 1945, we created those weapons, and now we are faced with an ancient warning. Whoever obtains this power brings about their own end. Hopefully this time we will listen.